Hello, this is Brugghen again with more Old Testament. And today we start officially with the Parsha, with the part of the book of Genesis, of the Torah that's called Tulidot, which means births. Because this part talks about the births of Esau and Jacob, more importantly, as the father of the Jewish nation. The chapter starts in the previous segment called Chayei Sarah, which we finished in the yesterday, or in the previous segment, but it continues in Toledot, and it starts like with the story of Rebecca. First, her genealogy is given, and it states that Yitzhak, or Isaac, married her at age 40. And obviously, from the story, she didn't have any children. She was barren, like all the Jewish matriarchs, the great ones, from whom the nations come, from whom the survival of the nation, or from whom the descendants of the nation come. She is barren. She can't have children, or the story makes us think so. It's not really clear. Because what happens in the story, contrary to other matriarchs who couldn't have children, here Isaac goes and pleads with God on behalf of his wife. Jewish rabbis, interpreters have argued about this point specifically and indicated that maybe Isaac here was the one who couldn't have children, who couldn't help his wife conceive children. So he went and prayed and interceded and pleaded with God to have children. And as a result of that prayer, regardless of whose body didn't work the way it should, Rebecca conceived, and she didn't conceive with just one child. She had twins, double blessings. And that tells you something about the status of Rebecca in the story. She has twins. Now, she, for some reason, isn't happy with that. Her pregnancy is difficult. And she goes and she inquires, ladoresh is the Hebrew word used, from the Lord, and what's going on? Why am I having such a difficult pregnancy? And the Lord tells her about the twins and tells her that they will be two great nations and they'll be blessed. And this is supposed to console her. And the Lord tells her the prophecy, which I'm sure Rebecca keeps in her mind, and this is important. She keeps in her mind that the younger will serve the older child will serve the younger child, and so she most likely kept that in her mind, and it influenced her decisions later on. And she gives birth, and the first one comes out, and he is red. He is a red baby, and he was covered with hair. So they called him Esau. Now Esau means doer or maker, achiever. Hair represents virility and power in a male, and that's why probably they called him Esau. They called him the doer, the sort of someone who achieves things, the go-getter in idiomatic American English. And then his brother comes after him, and his hands are holding Esau's heel, and the heel in Hebrew is Aqib, and so that's why they called him Yaakov, and in Arabic it's Yaakov in Hebrew, and Isaac was 60 years old when these two were born. And Esau lives to his promise, lives up to his name. He's a doer. He's He's out in the desert, he's hunting, whereas Jacob is described as someone who's quiet and he lives in the tents. He's living in the tents. He's not a Habiru like his grandfather, or like his grandfather. He's not someone who moves about. He's not a doer. He's just staying home. And we know that because he stays home, he's a cook. He's a good cook. Now, this is the interesting thing about this part is that this is the struggle uh, historically. People who were hunters, that you had to move a lot, you had to be after your prey, you have to find where the hunt is, where the gazelles or whatever you're hunting is, and you have to move, so you're not home. And if you're living in the tents, you're sort of living the life in a way. You're not out there. You're not exposing yourself, and that's why Isaac loves Esau, because Esau is out there hunting and putting food on the table, literally. Also, the interesting thing is, remember, Rebecca comes from Mesopotamia, and in Mesopotamia, that's where pottery was invented, where clay and brick and all of these things were invented. And one of the interesting things about the invention of pottery is that it allowed, because of the nature of the material that pottery is made from, you can cook in it. And humans discovered new ways to cook and nourish themselves using agricultural products because of pottery and fire, of course. But fire was first, and then pottery came second, aided by fire, and humans started cooking. And so Rebecca probably taught that to Jacob. And then an incident happened, and this is what everyone who reads this segment ends up talking about, which is the Bakura, which is the birthright. Bakura. Remember this word, because when we talk about later on about Isaac blessing Esau, blessing Jacob, and Esau, this word will come in handy. So Bakura, which means birthright. Esau is out there in the desert doing things. He comes back to the tents. He's starving, uh, preparing an animal, dressing it, and preparing it for food takes hours and takes a lot of energy. So he doesn't have that, and he's starving. So he ends up selling his bakura, selling his birthright to his brother Jacob, who wouldn't give him food unless he gets his birthright. Now, the Nuzi tablets that I've spoken about earlier that were discovered in Iraq, it talks about younger kids buying birthright from their older siblings. So this kind of transaction isn't new. The lessons, of course, that everyone draws out of the story is that Esau wasn't focused on the important things, and he was focused on nourishing himself, which is true. But the lesson I also take from it is that Jacob is how not to behave. Jacob was not someone, at least at this stage in his life, he wasn't someone with a generous spirit. His brother is dying of hunger, and he's denying him food unless he gets something from him. Not a very brotherly way to behave. And I think Jacob, the whole arc of the story and life of Jacob, uh, is sort of starts here, and it's sort of summarized when Jacob meets Pharaoh. And this is a story we'll talk about in Exodus. And Pharaoh tells him to describe his life, and he says, "My life was hard. My life was in effect wicked, and I did not live as long as my fathers have lived." Remember, 120 is the maximum. Abraham lives to 170 plus. Uh, Ishmael lives to 130 plus. So the righteous people live long years, and Jacob is not going to attain those lengthy years. And I think it's because of that spirit in him that is not very generous. Um, so Jacob ends up with the Bakura, ends up with the birthright, and this is the first thing that he takes from Esau. Now, what happens next is we have another encounter with a Philistine. His name is Abimelech, and we encountered him earlier. Uh, there is a famine in the land, and Isaac wants to leave, so the Lord sends him to, he says, don't go to Egypt. And notice here, Isaac is forbidden from going to Egypt. This is where they are going to be in servitude later, but he forbids him from going there now, and he tells him to go and live among the Philistines, because that's the land of his inheritance. That's the land he gave to his dad. Even though he doesn't have political power and control, people like Abimelech do, this is the place he's supposed to stay. And the Lord reiterates the promise he gave to his father Abraham, that he will give him posterity, and he will give him land. So Isaac, Rebecca, of course, is very beautiful. They go into Philistine land. They live in Gerar with Abimelech's people, and he tells him that Rebecca is his sister. Apparently, Abimelech wouldn't be fooled twice, so he kept an eye on Rebecca and Isaac and realized that they were husband and wife. And he brings him in, calls him up on it, and he gives him money. He makes sure that he has rain in the land, and Isaac becomes very, very wealthy in amongst the Philistines, and the Philistines sort of have this envy, so they kick him out. And wherever Isaac goes, he's digging wells of water, which is common in that part of the world, and he's getting water. And so he's being blessed, and he digs several wells of water, gives them names because every time he finds water, he's either quarreling or fighting with the Philistines. So he gives each well a name reflecting that. And then he meets with Abimelech, and they have a covenant. Notice again, this is the second time a covenant between the house of Abraham and the Philistines is made. This is the second time, and this will play a role in the story as we go on. And then Esau, on the other hand, just as if the writer of Genesis wants to emphasize Esau's character, Esau marries a Hittite. And that's contrary to the opinion of Isaac and Rebecca. So he contradicts his parents, and he doesn't do their will, and he doesn't marry someone from Isaac's and Rebecca's family in Ur in Mesopotamia, and that's the part of the story. These are the basics, and this all will lead to the next story, which is an important story about Jacob getting the blessing, the younger son getting the blessing. And this is a pattern that we'll keep seeing throughout the scriptures, and especially in the Old Testament. That's all I have for now. Thank you for listening.